PlayStation just announced the PSVR 2. It's got a lot of great improvements, but don't believe all of the hype. We've got a lot to unpack here, so stay tuned here at the VR Aperture. Thank you again for joining us here at the VR Aperture, your source of most detailed news in virtual reality and related hardware, and reviews from an engineer's perspective. I am Destroy Troy, and I'll be your host of the Aperture. Like we mentioned, PlayStation has announced the PSVR 2. There's a lot of things to look forward here, but as we mentioned, some of it is a bit of hype. So we're going to go through all of this one by one, but first we're going to start with some of the straightforward specs. First off, the PlayStation VR 2 will have inside-out tracking. This is a massive improvement from the previous PlayStation VR, as the original had a dual camera sensor that you placed in the center, right in front of your television, and provided 180 degrees of tracking in a limited space. With PlayStation VR 2, the inside-out tracking, where it has 4 cameras built in that looks out at the surroundings around you to track its position and orientation, will allow for 360 degree tracking and a much larger movement space to more fully utilize the area that you have available. Next is the haptic feedback. We're pretty excited about this. It's likely to be very simplistic in this sensory feedback that you get, being that it's driven by a single motor, but we think that many years from now, when some creators doing a history of the past 10 or 20 years of VR, PlayStation VR 2 will be recognized as the first headset to have built-in haptic feedback, and likely will get more and more complex and provide more realistic sensations over time. But this is just breaking the ice with haptic feedback built into the headset. So pretty exciting. Next, eye tracking will be included in the PSVR 2 headset, and not a lot of headsets yet provide eye tracking. Interesting, someone asked me, what does eye tracking do, or what can you do with it? Well, mostly it animates the eyes of your avatar, and really you're only going to be so close to another real individual in VR for them to notice the animation of your eyes, in probably only like VR chat or maybe big screen VR. So the application's kind of limited and doesn't provide a great amount of functionality. PlayStation does say that vaguely that it provides an extra input for your game character. By looking in a certain direction, it can provide another input. I'm not really sure how much use, how much application you can get, or how exciting of a feature that really is. But one truly exciting thing that eye tracking does enable is foveated rendering. Now, we've talked about this before in a previous video. Foveated rendering is where, by tracking the eye's motion, it can truly focus its rendering power, its computational resources, to rendering the spot directly in front of the pupil, and then maybe a slightly degraded resolution surrounding that. This will just kind of provide like a greater, even more amazing level of resolution and picture quality to the user, without having it over like a ridiculously expensive headset. A device with lesser hardware specs can provide a higher than normal level of resolution, because it's only rendering in great detail the area right in front of the eye. So this is pretty exciting. Also, with the PlayStation VR 2, there'll be an IPD and focal length adjustment. Many headsets offer IPD adjustment. That's the interpupillary distance that you can adjust for the individual, but also the focal length, allowing for it to come in and out. The Quest 2 doesn't offer this. The Index offers this, and I really like having that. It helps maximize the field of view. So if you can bring the displays that much closer in, then it wraps around your peripheral vision that much more. Another thing that we thought was really cool was this guild or accordion style gasket face mask. we think this is going to be a really good move by PlayStation. We tend to like the aftermarket gasket style face mask anyways over the fabric style or foam style, so that's cool. But this looks particularly like it's going to be good at blocking out the peripheral light around the nose, around the edge of the eyes, and it looks like it's going to be really comfortable. With the, speaking of comfort, we like the Halo style. They've stuck with the Halo style strap. We feel that it leverages, excuse the pun, the center of mass of the headset. It provides a good balance for the headset, and they've gone ahead with the dial style tightening, ratcheting tie down like the Index has in the rear. And we think this is probably going to be a really comfortable strap. The controllers for the PlayStation VR2, they're a massive improvement, right? So no more wands, no more visual light tracking. These will be tracked by the cameras in the headset, but they include 2 analog sticks, 2 standard PlayStation style controller buttons, a grip button, and the same triggers that's available on the PlayStation 5's controllers that provides a variable trigger tension to give a realism of like a gun or whatever you might be doing in game, and then haptic feedback as well, specifically for the triggers. So they'll be bringing that to the PSVR2 controllers, in addition to a capacitive touch sensor for supposedly Index and Thumb. We saw Index, but according to some review content creators, it'll be Index finger and thumb. And lastly, most importantly, and this is where we get into the weeds here, resolution. So the resolution advertised by PlayStation for the PSVR 2 is a 2000 by 2040 OLED 4K OLED HDR display. Now, in the words of CNET, just because a display says 4K HDR doesn't mean you're getting an increase in performance. Starting off with the 2000 by 2040 resolution, this is admittedly quite a bit of an improvement over the Index with a 1440 by 1600. But it's only a moderate increase over the Quest 2 at 1832 by 1920, right? So number-wise, it's a moderate jump. But what we keep seeing is this 4K everywhere, 4K, 4K, 4K. And the PlayStation put this on their announcement, and it's just being echoed by all the other publications and creators. It's like, oh, they said 4K, it's 4K, it's 4K. Let's back up a little bit here. A 1080p screen, sometimes can be considered a 1K screen, is 1920 by 1080, right? So we're going to round this to 2000 by 1000 from here on, just to make things easier, okay? Then you got a 4K screen, which is twice that in both dimensions, right? So you have, instead of 2000 by 1000, you have 4000 by 2000. It's actually 3980 by 2160, but like we said, we're rounding 4000 by 2000. So 2000 by 2040 is not 4000 by 2000. That's the same dimension this way, but half this way, right? And some might argue, well, when you put the two eyes together, you end up with 4000 by 2000, right? And so, yeah, it's likely a single display with 2 separate images on it for each eye, right? So it can be considered technically a 4K display in the headset, but think about the 4K screen that's on your wall, right? It's 4000 by 2000 rounded, but when you close one eye, you're still seeing 4000 by 2000. When you close your one eye in a VR headset, you're seeing the one eye spec. You're not seeing, each eye is not seeing all of the whole display. It's seeing half of that display that's in there. So when you close your eye on 4K screen on your wall, you're still seeing 4000 by 2000. When you're closing your eye in this PlayStation VR2, you're seeing 2000 by 2000. Okay? So it's not 4K in the sense that you're used to. This is a, square aspect ratio. And typically screens are advertised by their horizontal dimension. So like a 1080p screen, the 1920 by 1080 is advertised as 1080, the up and down direction. The 4K screen is, it's advertised as 4K, but the main number that's advertised is the 2160. But the number that you'll see advertised is 2160. Each eye is seeing the same display overlaid. You're not seeing them side by side. So with both eyes open, you're not seeing a 4000 by 2000 display. You're seeing a 2000 by 2000 twice overlaid each other. So, and even then, if you're going to go by that horizontal dimension as being the method that's advertised for a display, the horizontal dimension for a 4K screen is 2160, and the horizontal dimension for a PlayStation VR 20 is a 20 by 40. Close, but you can't advertise it as 4K, because even if you're going to go say it's a square aspect ratio, Destroy Troy, it's not the 6:4 aspect ratio, widescreen aspect ratio. It's a square aspect ratio, and it's up and down. It's 2000, but once again, it's only 2040 up and down, and a 4K screen is 2160 up and down. So close, but not quite, right? So seeing this 4K blasted everywhere, 4K, 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 it's echoed, hey, it's a 4K screen because PlayStation said it's a 4K screen. Well, they didn't actually say specifically it's a 4K screen. Technically, it's it's really close to a 4K display in there. 2000 or 4000 by 2140. True 4K being 3980 by 2160. So very close to an actual 4K screen, but you're not seeing 4K resolution. The next thing is the advertising OLED. Well, seen some creators say, oh yeah, this is going to be great, it's OLED because it's going to have a higher contrast compared to LED or LCD. But between LCD and OLED is really a trade-off. Many manufacturers moved, even though LCD is an older technology than OLED, they moved for VR headsets to LCD because they found that the transition between frames was snappier. And it was a trade-off to lose some of that contrast, those deep blacks, with an OLED screen. But for a high-speed, competitive, let's say battle royale type game, you're probably going to prefer that snappier transition between frames, right? Maybe if you're playing a single-player adventure RPG, you might prefer that added contrast for the scenery, but for functionality, you're going to prefer the LCD. A true jump in technology would actually be moving to something like quantum LED, which is what the Pimax has in it, is a quantum dot LED LCD screen. Or there's other technologies that are on the horizon. That would be a true upgrade in technology. But between LED, LCD, and OLED, it's really kind of a trade-off. And then we move into the last bit of hype is the HDR. It's advertised, the original PlayStation VR was OLED. Well, this is HDR OLED, right? But HDR is really an advent for LED, so OLED most certainly has a greater contrast Although with an OLED screen, you're going to get higher contrast and deeper blacks, but with an LED screen, you get greater brightness. And the brightness is for television screens is measured in a unit called nits, right? So HDR works well with LEDs screens that meet, or exceed 1,000 nits of brightness. OLED screens, good OLED screens provide around 780 roughly nits. Even the highest brightest OLED screen only provides about 840 nits. So an OLED screen really doesn't provide the brightness necessary for HDR. And so you can maybe make that OLED compatible with the HDR codecs, but it's not really, like I mentioned in CNET, it's not going to really provide you an improvement in performance. Sure, yeah, okay, it's compatible with HDR, but is it really creating any sort of difference? We would argue that it's likely not, that you're probably not. Obviously, going from PlayStation VR to PlayStation VR2 is going to be a great improvement in the display quality, the picture quality. But if you were to have a headset with the same resolution, OLED resolution, and one with OLED HDR, we'd argue that you're probably not going to see much of a difference. HDR is really, like we said, an advent for LED displays, and so it's kind of a bit of hype to say it's OLED with HDR. But that is our wrap up. That's our review from an engineer's perspective. If you disagree with us, especially with this 4K contention, go down below and leave a comment, and we'll have a discussion about it. So that's what we have for you at this time. We look forward to getting more information. Obviously, you've probably heard we don't know a date or a price yet, and really how awesome the PlayStation VR2 is, it kind of really depends on how expensive it is. I don't see it being in the ballpark of the Index, $1,000 or anything. It's also not going to be in the price range of the Quest 2. So most likely, the add-on for the PlayStation 5 to get the PSVR 2 is probably going to be either between $400 and $500. But we look forward to finding out more about this upcoming headset, and when we do, we'll of course let you know. Thank you once again for tuning in to the VR Aperture. Please consider hitting the subscribe button, hitting the like button to help promote this channel, and have a great rest of your week.